Well, welcome everyone. I'm David Beckworth. I'm joined today by Brian Albrecht. He is a friend and he is also a chief economist for the International Center for Law and Economics. He also writes a fantastic newsletter on Substack, the same platform we're on, titled Economic Forces. And he just wrote a piece on Substack and had an amazing thread on X about this week's Nobel Prize for Economics announcement. So Brian, thank you for joining us and discussing the big news this week.
Yeah, happy to be here. Always fun to chat with you.
Well, it's fun to chat with you too. And I should also mention Brian is a former college football player, so he's kind of a renaissance man of sorts when it comes to economists. He does a lot of things that most economists can't do. So it's good to
It's
have him. I'm a well-rounded economist.
two different things, at least. In a former life, I did one different thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So we woke up Monday to some really exciting news for those of us and all of us. We care about long-run economic growth. That's the real thing we care about, even though I focus a lot more on business cycle issues. You actually are much more in this space with dynamism, business competition, antitrust issues, which are a key part of this literature. But we found out on Monday morning that Joel Mokyr from Northwestern University, Phil Van Yon from London School of Economics, and Peter Howell from Brown University. They were given the award. One half went to Mokyr, the other was split between the two for groundbreaking research explaining how innovation and creative destruction, the process for new technologies and ideas replace outdated ones, as popularized by Joseph Schumpeter, drives long-run economic growth and rising living standards. So this is about long-run economic growth, the process, how it happens. And this is exciting because this helps us make sense of how we got to where we are. As all of our listeners probably know, 200 years ago, most of humanity was in poverty. Now, most of humanity is not in poverty. But it's also a roadmap for the future. We have potential AI, breaking through with rapid growth. We also have potential for stagnation. And so
Mhm.
this literature is very, very useful. Now, Brian, I saw one of your tweets and you had a great thread. Again, folks, check out the thread. We'll discuss it here. But one of your tweets, you said you were worried when you woke up Monday morning. And so this was like Christmas coming early to you, right? So what were you worried about and how was this an early Christmas?
I maybe get too invested in this, but it's a fun thing as a popularizer of economic ideas. It's a fun thing to talk about. It gets people talking about economists. I was quoted in the New York Times. I don't get quoted in the New York Times every day, right? It's like this. Oh, people care for a few days about this, so I want to be there commenting on it if I know something, and yeah, it's a way to get the public engaged. And so I wake up early to make sure I'm talking about it right away, and it's always a little bit of hesitation. It's like, okay, is it going to be a prize I'm excited about? Is it going to be a topic I'm excited about? Is it authors I'm excited about? And there've been years where I wasn't so excited, and I wrote pieces and tried to be positive. David Angrist Card and I'm blanking on who the third one was. It shows a few years back. I said, this isn't really my area, but this
Yeah.
year was my area. In part, I'm not a historian, so Mokyr isn't right exactly my area, but I've read a bunch of his books. He writes for a popular audience. I know his work well. But then the other two on dynamism and economic growth is right up my area. And so, yeah, one, I think the ideas are important. Two, I think it's closely connected to my research, and so then I know something, and I'm not just saying the vague stuff. Yeah, so I was very,
Right.
very happy about these picks and the combination, because people had talked about Cure for a history award. Maybe it would have been with Echemoglu and Johnson, but they got it last year in a different combo, so maybe the history wasn't going to be there. People have talked about Adjian and Howitt as a possible award for a long time, but I think it's great to see them combined, because there's just so much of economics that's interesting. There's the pure theory that Ajahn and Howitt bring in, and like working out the formal models to capture idea. There's the deep research that Mokyr does that's quantitative at points, other times qualitative, really in the weeds on the Industrial Revolution, really in the weeds on Chinese history, and I think it was a prize for me, again, as a popularizer in addition to a researcher, that shows the breadth and yeah, just the possibilities of economic research and what it can do, and what it can be, and the excitement of it. So yeah, I mean, I'll stop there. There are a lot of cool things about this prize, and yeah, I was as good as I could have hoped for sure.
Yeah. And again, this speaks to what we ultimately care about, and that's long run economic
Mm,
growth, standard of living, people getting better off, less poverty. And this is right up that alley. And I
mm,
want to mention a few tweets I saw of other folks besides you who were just terribly excited about this. Christmas
mm,
come early. John Stenson from Berkeley, he goes, "It's 4 economic history Nobel Prizes in a row." And everybody wants to claim the prize for their team, right? So John Stenson claimed, 4 history Nobel Prizes in economics: Bernanke 2022,
mhm,
Golden 2023, AC Moglu, Johnson, Robinson 24, Mulcair this year.
mhm,
Then Ricardo Rice weighs in and says, well, from a different perspective, it's also the third prize in 8 years to the subfield of macro growth, 22 in a row. So everyone claim it. This is a
yeah,
wonderful process. Claim it, own it. Read up, read the discussions at the committee. Now, I
mhm,
just got to put out this little qualifier because there are some actual haters out there. As heartbreaking as it is for us to see them, I won't mention any of the haters. Although I will mention one group that will remind us that this is technically the Civrix Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences. But I say, folks, get over it because most people still consider this a Nobel Prize in
mhm,
economics. We still call the recipients Nobel laureates. So
mhm,
this point forward, we won't bring up this point. I just had to recognize, yes, technically there is a distinction, but this is a Nobel Prize in economics. All right, so let's begin, Brian, with Joel Mokure's contribution. So again, he got half of it. So what did he bring to the table?
So, let me make sure I get the exact, they split out the distinction of it, and I think you said something like the origins of it. Basically, so you said that it's about economic growth, but it's a particular form of economic growth through innovation. There's other forms that talk about capital accumulation, like a solo model is a capital accumulation one. You know, Douglas North stressed institutions, Acemoglu Johnson Robinson stressed institutions, but this prize really stressed innovation, um, both on the theory side and the historical side. So McCure's work is wide ranging. It's kind of hard to summarize his ideas, but in the thread, I point to one paper that's like the intellectual origins. It's an intellectual, it's an ideas based story. Um, there's institutions there, but the basic argument across a variety of his works is that ideas changed. We can talk about why they changed, but in particular around prosperity, around progress. The idea that the future could be better, like that changed around. I mean, there's different disputes of the years, but before the Industrial Revolution, we're not just looking back and we're not the Greeks writing about Troy as a history of that we could never replace with giants and whatnot. Like, no, we can improve the world, we can do stuff better. That some people would think that's heresy throughout history, but it's an important mindset that you can make things better, not just like one off. Oh, I stumbled onto a better thing, but that if we are serious and if we put our minds to it and individuals are tinkering and using science, we can improve, and we can have economic prosperity and things like that. It's not that every inventor is thinking about, oh, I'm going to generate economic growth, but I can make a profit, and I can make my life easier, and look, and a world develops around that of scientists who want to get credit for inventing calculus and things like that.
Yep,
Um, but if you're going to allow innovation, you also need to allow people to fail. And people to fail, they need to have outlets if things go wrong, and that involves, if you do something to annoy a ruler, you need to be able to leave, and that's one of the things that Europe had in particular. Is there's fragmentation, and so that's not the idea that if you really annoy Louis, whatever, you can go somewhere else out of his control, and you can continue experimenting and whatnot. And so you had institutions both at the policy level, which other people have stressed, but you had the ideas with that then combine to generate economic growth. And there's across different books, there's particular details. In his first book, I think it's the first one, what I think of as first one, the lever of riches. He has a distinction between propositional knowledge and prescriptive knowledge. So like technical know-how and then like applied on the ground and those working together, you know, and those people being in conversation is an important thing, and that
Yeah.
developed in Western Europe, and it developed um, in the UK, what's now the UK, and so those are the things that generated the start of economic growth. And then at the same time, if you're going to answer that question, you have to ask, okay, why didn't that happen elsewhere? And so you take,
Mhm.
you know, China is often put forward as the kind of the elsewhere. You know, China had very scientific community that had you know, inventions earlier, magnets, not magnets earlier, compasses earlier. It had fireworks earlier. It had all sorts of things earlier. But then the transitioning of that into the prescriptive knowledge, into the kind of the day-to-day knowledge didn't happen there because there wasn't the ability to exit. There wasn't the ability to communicate across countries, you know, across a wide swath of inventors and stuff like that. And so Mokure's got a few books. I think the one that I'd recommend for people here is the Culture of Growth. I think it's 2016 as kind of a it builds on earlier work and really stresses the culture and when I say culture, I don't mean like, are you Protestant or, you know, do you have, you know, the general things like the idea is the environment that's kind of pre-institutional. It's something not, it's not about property rights, although you need those. But his story is like, okay, lots of places have property rights, but you need the ideas, you need the culture, you need this exchange among scientists. You need Voltaire writing letters all across Europe, you know,
Yeah.
and people and that is the stuff that then connects with the you know the tinkerers and so on, and that's what generates economic growth.
Yeah, I recently had Mark Koyoma on the podcast. And actually, I have his book. We discussed
Yeah.
this book
Yeah.
of his here, and he actually he discusses Mokure's work a lot, and we got into the discussion of this Republic of Letters. You alluded to
Mhm.
Voltaire. It was
Mhm.
fascinating. They had this society where they were writing letters across continents. So there were certain things like a post office. Getting letters was
Mhm.
key, but it was this prescriptive knowledge and the propositional knowledge. You need this intellectual framework, this a culture that supports it, allows it,
Yeah.
and the United Kingdom was a very fertile area where it definitely spread that, but it
Mhm.
also spread throughout Europe. It wasn't just the UK, but key part of that. And I'm getting a bit ahead of ourselves here, but
Yeah.
we'll come back to Engyan and how his contributions. But any implications of this for like AI or tech regulation? I mean, this idea where we need to be. One of my takeaways
Yeah.
is we got to be open to change, right?
Mhm.
And change competition allows more idea generation. We want to have societies where scientists can freely innovate, they can fail, they can
Mhm.
take risks. Do you see any implications today for policymakers thinking about AI policy or tech regulation in general?
Well, let me it's a great question. A lot of people are going there. You know, it's a little bit of a stretch to, you know, pull too much out. But I think there are general principles, and they're
Okay.
actually not the ones that I've stressed so far in our conversation. But I have this quote. I'm going to pull it up from the Culture of Growth. The liberal ideas of religious tolerance. Okay, that's fine. The free entry into the market of ideas and belief in the transnational character of the intellectual community were essential to the Enlightenment. Okay, again, that's not telling us what to do on AI policy, but being open to new ideas. Okay, having this ability to think that things can change and be open to that change, and having systems to deal with it. Of course, no society is. I mean, we'd fall apart if everything changed on an instant, right? We need rigidity too, but there's
Right.
this unique aspect of allowing change, allowing experimentation, in the market of ideas, especially, which in the AI space, I think would be in the development of models, of different types of models and whatnot. Um, I think, you know, that and the transnational. I mean, this isn't directly your question, but like, i- if we're restricting immigration, is that going to help our conversation? You know, if we're shutting ourselves off the world in other dimensions, is that going to help, you know, ideas spread and idea generation? I think these are all negative things. Um, that again, it's not. it's not like if you read Culture of Growth, you need to come down on that exact same policy perspective. There's detail, but like it's a big. I mean, I think the liberal ideas, classically liberal,
Yeah.
or of exchange, of free entry, are what to take away from Mulcair's ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think another way to say that is we need to think positive sum thinking. We need to embrace positive sum
Yeah.
thinking here. We need to embrace change. We need to have positive sum thinking. So immigration, flow of ideas across borders, and that seems to be
Mhm.
less and less to say. The culture we're in, I think, is worrying to some degree that there is more and more, zero sum
Yeah.
thinking as opposed to positive sum thinking. So that
Yeah,
is the
I think is a great way of framing it, because it's that there's this impulse throughout history for rulers to suppress the population because there's this threat of being overtaken, right? If you
yeah.
come up with, especially around weapons, which I've written about, but like, you want to keep all the power. But if you allow or think about, if the if I allow my subjects, or I even pay them to do this experimentation, it can help me. That's the sort of stuff that
Yeah.
generates growth. And it's not just about the big policy questions, but it's also, that's a a thing in a company. You need managers that are going to allow their workers to experiment. Again, not completely, yeah, balance, but you know, a manager who completely thinks that, if their workers do a good job, they're going to take their job, like that's going to be destructive. So positive some thinking in all parts of our life, getting more of that, I think, is a natural takeaway.
Yeah, that is key.
Mm,
I'll put in just one plug for an area where this applies to me, my space, and that's like fintech and like
mm,
stable coins. It's been a big push for stable coins. In fact, the Genius Act has put stable coins within the U.S.
mhm,
regulatory perimeter now. There's been a lot of pushback, a lot of hesitancy to embrace it because it is different. It potentially threatens banks. But in
mhm,
my mind, look, anytime we have change, there's a chance for risk, right? There's a chance for
mhm,
things being disrupted, but that's the culture we want to be open to and to embrace. And I just think, writ large, we need to have that thinking. So whatever we can do to encourage that, I'm not sure how we
yeah,
change the culture. I mean, I do think I'll say this. I do think positive sum thinking is supported by robust economic growth.
mhm,
We're more
mhm,
open to
yeah,
people failing, taking chances, even to immigration.
right.
We have positive growth, and I do think
And we have
some
good
of the
research on that now. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so some of the populism,
yeah.
nationalism comes out of the great financial crisis, slow decade after that. All right, let's move on to Philip Agnon and Peter Howitt. What was their contribution? What's the other half?
Yeah, so their contribution, again, the prizes for innovation theories and theories and history of economic growth. So their contribution is, there's one core paper. It's a 1992 paper, but they're spin-offs or whatnot. But it's a theory of technological growth grounded in creative destruction. I mean, in the Schumpeterian term, creative destruction, that you are displacing products, and that's not there in previous models. Again, Solow had economic growth. Romer, who won the prize 2018 or something like that, his was about expanding. We get new products, but you never replace anyone. But in the Aghion and Howitt model, there's kind of a leader. You can pay some cost to kind of leapfrog them and create a better product. And this process is what generates economic growth, innovation. And they were able to tie it together in a nice way that modern theorists could use, and then empirical work after that. Doing the types of things that macro people take for think it's important, especially expectations about equilibrium, about the path, and general equilibrium, that all these prices hang together in a proper way. And the prices here are the profit opportunities. That if you make, like, why do you pay to make a better mousetrap? Why do you spend that money? It's because when you have the best mousetrap on the market, you're going to generate profits, and you're going to get a return of that. And so this, leapfrogging, getting ahead of each other is what their model is. It's about there's the replacing the old technology, and there's the creation of the new technology, and that process is what happens. It introduces some interesting tensions about when you're the leader, you want to block this, zero sum thinking we're talking about. If you're the leader, you want to find ways to block new entrants. If you're the potential new entrants, you want to find ways to hamstring the. Although you have less strength, you want to find ways to hamstring the leaders. But there's dynamics here. You can ask questions about where policy comes in of encouraging this sort of innovation and whatnot. But I'd say the core idea is that you know competition to be the best, to make the new product, that's the thing that drives economic growth in their model. Again, there's lots of models. They have a whole book building out the model. I mean, one thing that may be a little strange for non-economists is the power of a simple model. So what made their models, I forget how many Google Scholar citations, 18,000, 20,000, something like that I look up for this paper. You can tweak it and you can look at slightly different things. You can introduce, different rates of depreciation. You can introduce different, different markets and where innovation is to take an idea from Mokir. Mokir has this idea of macro innovations and micro innovations. Macro is not you and I macro. It's macro as in like out of nowhere, and micro versus incremental. And so you can have a model that does, in Agile and Howitt, you can have a model that does that. In the same, so it's a very useful model in that it's relatively technical, of course, but once you understand the technicality, you can play with it in different ways to bring out different ideas, but then also to connect it to the data better. And that's where it's also taken off is how fast does this happen? How much you know how many new firms are entering? How many firms are exiting? This is the dynamism stuff we mentioned. Can education policy affect this sort of process? All sorts of things. So I'll stop there.
All right. Now, you mentioned in your thread, again, that
Yeah.
thread motivated our conversation for those of you joining us, that it's remarkable how much the U.S. economy continues to grow in a fairly stable growth path. In fact, if you were to take, like a log
Mm.
transformation of real GDP, the Great Depression basically looks like a non-event. I mean, it's a big drop, but then we recover, we get back on
Yeah.
trend. Now maybe it would have been at a higher trend, but the fact is, we continue to plod along at a
Mhm.
fairly stable pace. This is remarkable for hundreds
Yeah.
of years, and this ties into the work of Aghion and Howitt, right?
Yeah, yeah. So again, they're theorists. So that if you go and read the paper, you don't see this because the paper is all about, well, Lucas and Romer have these models. We want to introduce a theoretical thing because it's theoretically interesting and whatnot. But
Yeah,
the committee, and I think they're right to stress this unique aspect of, um, we live in the U.S. We live in an economy that has economic growth very, very consistent, at least over any sort of 10-year period. Um, but the other fact that we now know much better than we did even in 1992, but definitely better than we knew in let's say 80, is that underneath that turbulence or underneath that steadiness is a bunch of turbulence. Uh, in the last quarter of 2024, which is the last quarter we have finalized data for, there are about 8 million people who lost jobs through quitting and through fires. Okay, there were just like 7.5 million. Sorry, 8 million that found jobs, 7.5 million that lost jobs. Okay, we have turnover rates but by different measures that are just astronomical. People leave jobs all the time in the U.S. economy. So how do you square this sort of this churn underneath, this chaoticness, the stuff that like gets people really upset about capitalism? Oh,
yep.
people lost jobs. How terrible that is for with the sustained growth. And this is where one of the things that Jen and Howard have done is they think of like a bunch of different markets. Like people are innovating on the mousetrap, so people are also innovating on on AI or whatever. And one of the things that makes their paper different than like Glenn Lowry has an earlier paper in the 70s on this is that you think about a lot of different markets. And by kind of a law of large numbers, or just by diversifying, the economy is diversified by a bunch of industries. Yes, each one is crazy. My job gets created and destroyed. My firm goes out and under. But out of 330 million workers, the overall effect is economic growth.
Yeah, it is a remarkable perspective to step back and look, man, there are millions of jobs lost and created in a given year. We only really
Mm.
think about this, say, in 2008 when it's more apparent and people are feeling
Yeah.
it. But every day, every year, I mean, this is happening, and yet we continue to grow. So it's phenomenal.
Yeah, so when we see the monthly, the you in August, employment rose 30,000 or 400,000, right? That's the net. Underneath
Yeah.
that are 2,000,000, 3,000,000 jobs happening, and when you a bunch of people getting new jobs, a bunch of people losing jobs, on net, we get, on a great month, 200, 300,000 jobs, right? Um, and so when you see that headline, it's really, um it's misleading, because yeah, there's so much else going on, and so in the '80s, better data was being developed, on firm dynamics. I talk about this in the thread and in the newsletter about measuring this. How many, the JOLTS report, the job, I always forget, turnover, whatever, labor turnover one, JOLTS. That's being developed, and so then after the Edge and Howitt model is out, now we're starting to have data from John Haltewanger at Maryland and co-authors at the census and stuff. And so now we can start bridging this theory of people, you know, if you have a model where, um, new firms are outpacing others, that has implications for firms leaving, firms entering, and we can start to build that together. So the data and this model are able to be brought together in a nice way.
Well, one famous economist
Yeah.
said, "Theory before the data," right? So,
I,
but
I mean,
theory,
yeah, you have to, and in a sense, like, okay, going back to, you had, mentioned some of the haters on Twitter, like, there's people saying, "Oh, this is all in Schumpeter, this is all," but, like, okay, but they're by putting in a formal model, you have particular predictions, you have particular measurement stories that you can dig
yeah.
into, okay? And maybe in the scheme of things, this is busy work for economists. Fine. But it's like, it gives us more detail on, I love Schumpeter as much as the next person. I'm writing a paper on Schumpeter right now for, uh uh because I think it's important. But, like, at the end of the day, if you want to start measuring stuff, it's nice to have a nicer, tighter connection between the idea of creative destruction and what we observe in the data, and that requires, but for dummies like me, like, a formal model is the way to make that connection.
Well, as our friend David Andel Otto always
Mhm.
says, because he gets into these exchanges with people on Twitter or on blog, we all have models, right? We all have models implicitly in our heads. Even
Yeah.
Schumpeter's, if you read his thing, it's implicitly a model.
Mhm.
There's no way to go to the data without an implicit model in your head. We're just trying to
Yeah.
be honest about it, lay out the assumptions,
Mhm.
the parameters. So we're just trying to be precise. And that's
Yeah.
helpful because then we can go to the data and make predictions and interpretations of past experience.
Mhm.
Um, so I want to focus in on Peter Howitt for a little bit here, because I'll confess my ignorance. So again, listeners, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, this is right up Brian's alley.
Mhm.
He knew this stuff. In fact, I'm impressed when people like you and Alex Tabarrok, like, the announcement comes out about an hour later. There's this amazing post or thread with all this knowledge. I'm like, wow, these guys really know this literature. For me, Peter Howitt is somebody who did monetary economics, or at
Mhm.
least he did a contribution in what's called the monetary disequilibrium literature. I think Leland Yeager, Robert Clower. That was my introduction
Mhm.
to him and what I knew about. I didn't realize he'd done this other works. So, can you speak to this other area at all?
A little bit, definitely not as much as you can. And I believe tomorrow on our newsletter, Economic Forces, I believe Josh is going to write on how it's monetary. If not, it'll be relatively soon. But yeah, so Howard is a unique figure and a super interesting one, especially, again, circling back to me being a popularizer of sorts. Like, it's fun that someone does formal theory, but also has, basically all his papers have formal models. I'll say that, but they're wide ranging from economic growth to this disequilibrium. One of the things that makes Howard unique is that he's, is the in the formal, these are formal models of disequilibrium. which fell out of favor. Barrow tried to write these sorts of models in the 70s and whatnot, but that he keeps writing on them in search type of models and in other ones that I don't quite know how to explain them. But yeah, it's for example, one of the papers that I cite in the thread that I really like is in the spirit of a model like Kiyotaki and Wright, is how do institutions form around money, and why do certain people specialize in being the person that exchanges money, and why do certain goods become money? Like we all know this when we teach a macro course. What are the
Yeah.
things that, or you take an intro macro, what things make good money identifiable, they're not too heavy to lug around, yada, yada, yada. But then to put these in a formal model where people actually tie it all together, that's what Howard is able to do. One thing I do want to peg, and maybe you know more about this, but I believe Howard wrote about the Taylor rule, Taylor principle before Taylor. That both papers came out in 1992, Howitz and JPE on interest rate control. But I believe that the earlier working paper was before what we call the Taylor rule was first put in. So he's like, I mean, in 92, he's got what won him a Nobel Prize. He also got another paper for like something that may win someone else a Nobel Prize. So pretty impressive. Yeah.
Representing the Canadians well, right? He's from
Yeah.
Canada, right? Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, I assume so. He did his
I thought he's,
undergrad
yeah, from
at
Canada.
Western
So yeah,
Ontario. So I
very,
assume.
very ambitious, but also very curious. Maybe that's another point to make. He's very curious, applies his curiosity
Mm,
across many disciplines. But monetary
mm,
disequilibrium, I mean, my exposure to it was, one way to look at this is, again, there might be other causes for what's happening to money demand, money supply,
mm,
but at the proximate level, you look at disruptions between the real demand for money, the
mm,
supply of it. That's the fundamental driver of business cycle activity. So this is an example. You can think of like 2008, 2007, 2009, the Great Recession. You could tell there's a financial crisis, there's a housing
mm,
crisis, subprime crisis, but you could also tell there's a story about money, the money supply. If you look at institutional money assets,
mm,
they completely disappeared overnight when there was
mm,
a massive run on Wall Street. So institutional money assets, repo, they catered, and there
mm,
are measures in the Center for Financial Stability in New York. They have a Divisia M4, which includes
mm,
traditional like retail money assets, but also institutional money assets. It literally contracts quite a bit in 2008,
yeah,
and this is a story you can weave and tell together with a monetary disequilibrium story. So Peter Howlett is, again, my exposure to him is that angle. So it's neat to
yeah,
see someone so curious with kind of like, dipping his toes in the waters throughout, and sometimes dipping his toes very deep and having a Nobel Prize come out of it.
yeah.
So
And this is not. Yeah, I may be being a little glib of him hopping around because I mean, he 92 for sure. He's got a paper monetary. 2024, I think I saw a paper. Like he's been. This is clearly one of its areas. But if you look at just the models, they're not. It's not like an offshoot of the other models. Like these models, the way they're structured, the 92 paper actually has adaptive learning, if I believe, versus the more traditional rational
yeah.
expectations. Like, this isn't just. I myself have written a little bit on monetary search, and those you can kind of relabel things and call it labor search, and like a bunch of the mathematics stays the same. And again, for a dummy like me, that's nice. I can start talking about, like, I have a search paper on social insurance and stuff, but it really you could have rewritten it and it'd be like a money paper or whatever. Whereas the smarter people like Howard, they're able to. We got a bunch of different models we can think through, but we want to be formal. We want it to tie it all together. Yeah,
Well, maybe Peter Howlett's renewed, um, maybe the renewed interest in Peter Howlett and
yeah,
an exploration of his work will lead to an advancement in
mm,
monetary search models, because I know they haven't got quite the hearing like
yeah.
standard New Keynesian models have had. So
Yeah, and the Howard one, again, this outside of my area, are I mean the monetary disequilibrium stuff is different than the regular search, and I can't say enough about why they're a little bit different, but they're both explicitly alternatives to a
yeah.
more Walrasian type that the New Keynesian are based on. Absolutely.
Well, let's
So,
tie this back
yeah.
into what you do. So you are actively engaged in research and promoting business dynamism, allowing competition, failure. I mean, you're like a modern day Schumpeter, right? You you promote all of this
But
great stuff. So how have you found their work helpful in what you do day to day?
you say, Schumpeter's got this famous line that his goal was to be the best economist in the world, the best horse rider in the world, and the best lover in the world, and he accomplished 2 of 3 or whatever. So I went to that,
There
when
you
you compare
go.
me to him. Yeah. No, I can't ride horse. Yeah, so I work on business, a variety of things, but one of the things that I've written about that we've talked about on your podcast is business dynamism, which is there's people at the census and other government agencies collect data on what new firms are entering or are starting up. When do businesses open new establishments? A second location, things like that, and kind of the causes and consequences of changes in that. So one of the big debates, or one of the big areas of focus is for the U.S., but also basically every other country we have data on from the '80s or '90s to, let's say, 2020. COVID's different. There's a decline in business dynamism. There's a decline at the aggregate level of this Schumpeterian, creative destruction of new firms replacing old firms. And one is, how do you measure that? Like, what are the different ways to
Hmm.
measure it? That's an important thing that people need to figure out. Um, and that's where we get the jolts, as we get the big job number turnover. But then two, like, okay, what are the trends? What are the causes and consequences? Different things. So I don't collect the data. The people are much more serious collect the data. I, analyze that data, to try to make sense of what's driving it. And you know, because part of my other work is on antitrust. A lot of people like to point to changes in antitrust as a reason. We're not challenging as many mergers and acquisitions are going through as a reason. I'm pretty skeptical of that theory, but in principle, there's an argument here. Agion himself would in his 2021 book, I forget who the other co-authors are. He makes a big deal about this. Like, this is why we saw a decline in business dynamism, but then also in productivity growth, which is more of kind of his core, thing he's looking at is the economic growth and related to that productivity growth. Um, yeah, so I work a bunch on that, and so Adrian and how its model is sometimes in the foreground. It's sometimes, I don't have any papers explicitly with that model, but purpose of growth is there, but it's often in the background. Like, this is the thing we care about. If we're going to have economic growth, um, what we need, the institutions that Mokir talks about. We need to protect those and whatnot. But we need policies that allow one company to surpass the other, or if you are the best company, to be rewarded for that. And that's really the thing that matters in the long run is technological progress. Now, that's could be vague. We don't know exactly what that means and how it comes about, but you know, we have things that in the data we've learned things that are very important. The ability to fire workers is an important thing. We look across countries, more labor market regulations slow down this Schumpeterian process, and thereby slow down economic growth. And there's lots of related policies, and related. Yeah, I mean, policies is the important thing that we think about changing that determine this.
Well, let's wrap things up here. We've had a great conversation. I'm going to go back to these different theories of long-run economic growth. We spent most of it talking about the ones that were awarded the Nobel
Mhm.
Prize this
Mhm.
year. But you also mentioned the solo model, which is, it's a real simple but useful model: capital
Mhm.
accumulation, productivity growth. Um, there's also the Romer model, the endogenous growth model, and then we'll
Mhm.
come back to the ones we just discussed here. And I'm thinking, what are the big issues going forward for humanity, for the planet, for economic growth? And I think, we touched on one of them. That one is like, zero sum
Mhm.
thinking, some stagnation, lack of dynamism. And this is where I think, Agnon and Howitt and Mercure come into play. But I also think another big concern going forward is the decline in population, absolute decline, not just the decline in population growth rate, but there's a decline in, well, I mean, the world's
Yep.
population is still growing, but it's gonna turn a corner here soon.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, like, where do you rank or place these concerns? And like, Romer's endogenous growth model really stresses that population growth is important for idea
Mhm.
generation going forward. Now, I know there's the semi-endogenous growth model, which says there's diminishing returns to having more and more people. Ideas get harder and harder. So that there's limits, but still, the more people you have, the more supply side innovation, more specialization,
Mhm.
the greater the chances of more Einsteins being born.
Yeah.
So it's what do you see as a bigger concern? Do you see, the decline in idea generation tied to the decline in fertility rates and population growth is a big concern, or do you see the stagnation, the zero sum thinking?
Y
What do you see going forward?
Yeah, no, those are both concerns to me. I think in the immediate term, it's the zero sum thinking policy stuff. So let's take the Romer model. In a Romer type model, again, I said the way that you get economic growth is you create more variety of goods. Okay. Um, International trade generates a lot more variety of goods. Right? You're exposed to more, my kids eat fruit that I never would have had as a kid. And I'm not that old. I mean, I'm not like you, but I'm not that old.
Wow.
You know, and a lot of the measurement of the benefits of economic growth, I've written about it, I forget where else, is just expanding variety. And so that's
Yeah.
or the cost of tariffs is a decrease in variety. And so that the Romer model points to that. Again, how it points to it in a slightly different way, or like it addresses like tariffs and closing of international trade. And that mechanism is that one of the reason you make a better product, the reason you make a better mousetrap in their model is you can win a chunk of the market, you can win some profits. Well, when the market's bigger through international trade, that's a bigger return for your innovation. Okay, and there's a huge literature, some of it building off of Ajahn and Howard, also a different model by there's like Hopenheim's got model, Melitz has models of international trade and business dynamism. That hurts that. Sorry, that like a policy like tariffs or a policy like yeah, let's stick with tariffs. We talk about that. Just decreases the returns to making those investments. And so anytime you make the market smaller or make the returns smaller, you're going to get less innovation. Now you mentioned demographics, and I think over the longer term that's an important one. I think it's For example, so I've talked about the business dynamism decline. We have fewer new businesses that are creating jobs. That fell from 1990 to 2019. It's risen since then, but it's still not back up where it was. There's a paper that tries to account for that through demographics. Okay, that basically when you have fewer young people, you have fewer people starting new firms. When you have fewer people starting new firms, you're going to get fewer innovations. Okay, they don't use an Ajahn and Howard model. I'm thinking of it's Karahan, Pugsley, and Sahin. I don't know how to pronounce all the Turkish names that well. But so they say that you can account for basically all. I'm not sure that they're right. You can account for all of it from demographics, the slowdown in dynamism. And we know that the slowdown in dynamism spills over into things like productivity and economic growth. Like we don't care
Yeah.
about new jobs per se. We care about new jobs per se, or new jobs because they create new products, because they raise incomes, because they generate economic growth. So the chain is lower, fewer young people, fewer new firms, fewer new products, lower economic growth. That's the markup. That's the connection in their type of model, and it's plausible to me. Um, how much is that effect versus the Romer kind of fewer ideas effect? It's kind of different ways you can decompose it, but I think they're both important, and I'm with you that in the longer run, let's say a few decades, like that is something that concerns me going forward. Now, there's ways around it. More immigration is a way to
Yep.
for the U.S. in particular more immigration is a way to reverse that. I don't know of any paper that makes a distinction between native born and foreign born for these types of models. So, well, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're going to look back with fondness at this period where we did have high immigration,
Mhm,
whether it was legal or illegal. I'll be as bold to say that because in the future we can see the writing on the wall. Demographics are in
mm,
decline, and and this will be a zero sum game. The number of people
mhm.
in the world, yeah, we can import more people into the U.S., but
Yeah.
that's going to be less somewhere else. So total amount of humanity is going down because I don't think we are going to reverse fertility rates. I think
Yeah.
that's going to be stuck with us.
But that's you're falling into a little zero sum thinking there. Like if the productivity rises in the US more than it possibly could rise at home, then you have a bigger pie
Yeah,
overall, and so
that's a good
you
point.
can
Fair
offset
point.
that. And not my area at all. I believe that the the modern consensus in the literature is that the brain gain to a country like the US is bigger than the brain drain somewhere else, and I forget the exact mechanisms, and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't no one in the audience quote that as if it's gospel, but I believe there's arguments for that.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Brian. This has been a great conversation. It's been a great week. Nobel Prize for Economics. And we look forward to more conversations. And again, folks, if you're listening, be sure to check out Brian's Economic Forces article that he just published. And then it sounds like your co-author, Josh, will be releasing one on how it's other work related to monetary economics. So that'll be exciting. I look forward. Maybe I need to get Josh on here as well to cover the rest of the story. So Josh is
Yeah,
a great monetary economist.
for sure.
All right. Take care, folks. And this will be put online at Substack later, along with the edited or summary of our discussion.